Hi all, let's have a look at a notable game from Nakamura's perspective, very important for the World Cup, and it was played against Samuel Shankland on the 16th of September 2015, a couple of days from this video, a couple of days before. So c4 from Nakamura, and we have g6, knight c3, c5. By the way, I've played both of these players on the ICC, but losing to Nakamura twice. Beaten Shankland once. There's a 5-minute video against him. Yes, one of my greatest 5-minute achievements, I think. So g3, bishop g7, bishop g2, knight c6, d3. Nakamura's kind of playing a kind of wet lettuce system. After e6, when I say wet lettuce, there's these systems in the English Open. You've really played them to avoid sharp opening theory, and you're not really expecting a massive advantage or anything. Here, bishop f4 has this mild threat of bishop d6. That's stopped. And now we have this queen c1 move, which, as though bishop h6 will be played if black plays knight e7, knight ge7. But black parried this in advance with h6. And then we have a3, as though white wants to play later for a b4, knight ge7, and now rook b1. This is proper wet lettuce system style in the English opening. Now really, the serious point here is that white is trying to emphasize his central pawns, and this is a natural pawn to try and undermine. It's one of black's most advanced pawns and the most easy to kind of attack and try and increase white's preponderance of pawns in the center. Preponderance of pawns. So e5 though was played. It does create a slight hold on d5. Bishop d2, but black's follow-up is to cure that hole by quickly and rapidly playing for d5 here. Nakamura allows that. He can't really consider e4. That's just a massive hole himself on d4 to clamp that. So he just plays b4. And we have a potential problem now with b takes and rook takes b7. Black parries that, queen d7. Now knight f3 is played. And here, black takes first on b4 before playing d5. So it seems black has a pleasant enough position at this point. And Nakamura's pieces don't look entirely as though they're coordinating in the most elegant way. b5 though seems a very logical move. Knight d4. And now c takes d5. Knight takes d5. Some simplification now. Knight takes d4, e takes d4. Is this pawn potentially a weakness later? Because Nakamura exchanges off rapidly a lot of pieces here. Knight takes and bishop takes, queen takes. White now castles. So quite a lot of simplification. h5, as though black is interested in playing something like this. But here bishop b4. And now this bishop stops actually the black king from castling. You might think, well, perhaps this is a bit ambitious. Maybe black should have just castled. But the thing is, there's a snag here, of course. Bishop takes h6. So yeah, there's a reason for this h5. It's not just about h4. But bishop b4 stops black from castling. And here is a move which took Nakamura by surprise. King d7. It looks a bit strange to play a move like king d7. But black, if he can contest the c-file, shouldn't have any major problems here, it seems. Queen f4. Now bishop h6, taking, in fact, c1. It looks as though black might be striving for a positional advantage even. Queen h4, looking at e7. That's parried with bishop g5, keeping control of c1. Queen h3 check, f5. Now queen g2, white is happy to try and simplify here a bit further. Queen takes, king takes. Rook h e8. And yeah, it looks as though white has played this game in super wet lettuce style. In fact, there's footage at some point during this game and Nakamura is shaking his head. And yeah, when asked about it, he didn't feel he got that much from the opening. And if you don't get much from the opening, then you kind of, in a 2-game match, he was emphasizing, you have to try and just hold in the second game. The matches are too short. So not getting an advantage here might have been annoying. But this next move may have delighted Nakamura. Bishop e7. Perhaps better is bishop f6. The problem here is, fundamentally, after bishop e7, there's a double-edged nature of black's d4 pawn here. Of course, it's a binding pawn, securing a space advantage, restraining white's e3 potentially. But with the exchange of the bishops, it's more likely to be a weakness in resulting endgames. And also, there's a backward pawn here, not a backward pawn, a kind of exposed pawn here. This pawn, it's not backward because this pawn's on the same thing, but it's kind of exposed on the A file. So there's potentially two different targets here in the position. So white is happy to take the bishop on e7. And now white might actually have, in this endgame, for the first time, a small advantage, because the king can actually look after a bit this pawn with king f3. And these targets can now be probed and tie black down a bit to them. Rook e5. Of course, the b5 pawn is arguably a bit weak. But now rook a4, so simultaneously attacking two targets in black's position. This d4 pawn, while it was very functional and useful earlier, seems to be now an endgame target. Rook d5. The rooks, as a side effect now of these weaknesses, are very passive. Look at the black rooks compared to the white rooks. They're pretty passive, nannying these weaknesses. Now we see h4 fixing down these pawns a bit more and making way more safely for king f3 without, say, black playing g5, and maybe g4 would be useful. King d6. It kind of simplifies the position to try and fix down the opponent's pawns. Rook c4, trying to take the c file now. Rook e8. And now king f3. So the king holds e2 as well now as the rook on b2. Rook e7. Rook a4 again. b6. Slight concession of the c6 square. Rook c4. So rook c6 now with that weakened c6 square means g6 would drop off. So that's parried now with rook c7. The thing is, this simplification here is interesting. After rook takes, king takes, king f4. The king now threatens king g5. This is a weak dark square complex here. King b7. If black can try and create a passed pawn, but is it too slow to try and create a passed pawn? Because king g5 now needs to be parried surely. Rook d6. Rook a2, slowing down black's attempts to easily create a passed pawn with a6. Black has to basically try and sack a pawn to get his passed pawn. So b takes. He's got a passed pawn, but now time needs to be spent to play b5 and maybe take this a6 pawn at some point. Now here the king comes back to f4, so to e5 maybe. Rook e6, stopping king e5. Now even though white's got that extra pawn, but now plays in the center with e3, he's creating his own passed d pawn. D takes, f takes. So there's a runner here. Okay, here black plays b5 and he's hitting a6, but also another idea is to get behind this pawn, maybe take with the king later on a6, trying to equalize. White seems to play a very accurate looking move by all evidence here. Nakamura to play avoids playing d4 in this position, which might tempt some. He actually plays what seems to be the strongest, e4. There's an immediate threat of e5 and then d4, d5, and we have two connected passed pawns. So black really needs to try and do something about this. If, for example, on d4, it seems as though black might actually be okay, like this, for example. We have this scenario where black might actually be holding this position. Endgame gives us about equal. So this is very interesting, e4. Here, f takes is played, d takes, and now b4, but now e5. Here we have b3, rook b2, rook b6, trying to hold on to that pawn, but it's distracted now. The rook is distracted, and we transition into another favourable position here, because the king is nearer to munch black's pawn simply. This king is out in the wilderness over here. It does take on a6 to restore material equality, but king g5, you can tell this king is just really aggressive, and this king is just cut off. Rook f3 as though rook f6 is coming. Now here actually rook f6 is good, but also this is good. Doesn't lose anything to play like this. Check, and here black resigns. The pawns are falling. So an interesting game, an important game for the World Cup for Nakamura to make progress. So he's knocked out Samuel Shankland in the all-US encounter. It shows that sometimes the middle game we've got to be aware that in the end game, those pawns which are providing great functionality in the middle game, such as a space advantage or a bind, can become weaknesses. So it seems that d4 and a7 became weaknesses in the end game. And Nakamura, through precise play, managed to use also his extra active king to transition into what looks, fairly easy now. The king out of nowhere, this king on b7. Okay, I hope you got something from that. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.